The morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling train platform as commuters hurried past with their coffee cups and briefcases. Among the sea of rushing people, one figure stood perfectly still. Harold Mitchell, 92 years old with silver hair neatly combed and wearing a faded military jacket, clutched a worn leather briefcase against his chest. His weathered hands trembled slightly, not from age but from something far more pressing. The weight of what he carried had kept him awake for 3 nights straight. Inside that briefcase lay documents that could change everything: photographs, classified reports, and evidence that powerful people had worked very hard to keep buried for over 50 years. Harold's pale blue eyes scanned the crowd nervously. He had chosen this busy train station deliberately. Public places felt safer, or so he had thought. The plan was simple: meet the journalist at Platform 7, hand over the evidence, and finally let the world know the truth about what really happened during his service in Vietnam. But something felt wrong. The same 2 men in dark suits had been standing near the ticket booth for the past 20 minutes, occasionally glancing in his direction. Their presence made the old veteran's military instincts kick in. After surviving 3 tours of duty, Harold knew when he was being watched. He checked his watch again. The journalist was late. Maybe she had changed her mind, or worse, maybe someone had got to her first. Harold had reached out to Sarah Chen, an investigative reporter known for exposing government corruption, 3 weeks ago. Their phone conversations had been brief and coded, but she seemed genuinely interested in his story. The briefcase contained evidence of illegal experiments conducted on soldiers during the war. Harold had been one of the test subjects, along with dozens of other young men who had no idea they were being used as human guinea pigs. Most of them were dead now, and those who survived had been sworn to secrecy with threats that still haunted their dreams. As Harold waited, memories flooded back. The mysterious injections they were told were vaccines. The strange side effects that the doctors claimed were normal. The way soldiers who asked too many questions simply disappeared, transferred to units that no one could ever locate. He remembered his best friend Tommy Rodriguez, who had started asking questions about why so many of them were getting sick. Tommy vanished one night, and when Harold asked about him, he was told Tommy had been killed in action. But Harold never saw a body, never got confirmation. A young mother with a stroller accidentally bumped into Harold, apologizing quickly before rushing away. The brief contact made him realize how exposed he was standing in the middle of the platform. He moved closer to a pillar, trying to blend in while keeping his eyes on the 2 men in suits. His phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. "Harold, this is Sarah, running late due to traffic. We'll be there in 15 minutes. Stay safe." Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. How did she get his phone number? He had been careful to use a secure email account for all their communications. His paranoia, honed by decades of keeping this secret, told him something was very wrong. Harold noticed more suspicious activity around the platform. A woman reading a newspaper hadn't turned a page in 10 minutes. A maintenance worker seemed to be cleaning the same spot repeatedly while watching the crowd. The old veteran's heart began racing as he realized he might have walked into a trap. The briefcase felt heavier in his hands. Inside were photographs of the facility where the experiments took place, medical records showing the effects on soldiers, and most importantly, a list of the officials who had authorized the program. Some of those names belonged to people who were still alive, still in positions of power, still protecting their dark secrets. Harold had spent 50 years keeping quiet, following orders even after his service ended. But when he was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer that doctors said was likely caused by chemical exposure, he knew his time was running short. The same cancer had killed at least 6 other veterans from his unit, the same men who had received those mysterious injections. He thought about his grandson Michael, just graduated from high school and planning to join the military. Harold couldn't bear the thought of another generation of young soldiers being used and discarded. That's what had finally given him the courage to come forward. An announcement echoed through the station about a delayed train, but Harold barely heard it. His attention was focused on the growing number of suspicious individuals positioned around the platform. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. A chill ran down his spine as he realized they weren't there to arrest him. They were there to make sure he never left the station alive. The weight of 5 decades pressed down on Harold's shoulders. He had survived a war, raised a family, and built a quiet life, all while carrying this terrible secret. Now, in what might be his final moments, he wondered if he should have spoken up sooner. How many other soldiers had suffered in silence? How many families never knew the real reason their sons and fathers had died? Harold's military training kicked in as he assessed his situation. The platform had limited exits, and several of them seemed to be blocked by the suspicious individuals. His best chance was to head toward the main terminal, where there would be more people and security cameras. But first, he needed to make sure the evidence would survive even if he didn't. With shaking fingers, he pulled out his phone and began typing an email. If something happened to him, at least the evidence wouldn't die with him. He attached scanned copies of the most important documents and addressed the message to every journalist and news outlet he could think of. His finger hovered over the send button as he made the most important decision of his long life. The sound of heavy footsteps approached from behind. Harold didn't turn around, but he could feel their presence getting closer. Time was running out, and he was about to discover just how far those in power would go to protect their secrets. Harold's finger pressed the send button just as a firm hand landed on his shoulder. He spun around to face a tall man in a dark suit, his face expressionless behind sunglasses despite being indoors. The man's grip was strong but not painful, meant to control rather than harm. "Mr. Mitchell, we need to have a conversation," the man said in a calm, professional voice that somehow made Harold's blood run cold. "My name is Agent Morrison. I think you know why we're here." Harold's military bearings straightened despite his age. "I'm just waiting for a train, son. Nothing illegal about that." Agent Morrison's partner appeared beside them, equally imposing and similarly dressed. The platform suddenly felt smaller as Harold realized they had been completely surrounded. The maintenance worker had stopped pretending to clean and was walking toward them. The woman with the newspaper had folded it and was also closing in. "The briefcase, sir," Morrison said, extending his hand. "We know what's inside and we know who you were planning to meet. This doesn't have to be difficult." Harold clutched the briefcase tighter. "This is a public place. You have no authority to—" "Actually, we do." Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out official credentials. "Homeland Security. This involves national security matters, and you're coming with us." The old veteran's mind raced. Homeland Security hadn't even existed during the Vietnam War when these experiments took place. But clearly, the cover-up had evolved with the times, growing new tentacles to protect the same old secrets. "I'm an American citizen," Harold said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I have rights." Morrison's expression didn't change. "Those rights don't extend to possessing classified materials that could compromise ongoing operations and endanger lives." "The only lives that were endangered were the soldiers you people experimented on," Harold shot back, loud enough that nearby commuters began to notice the confrontation. "Including me and my friends. Most of them are dead now because of what you did to us." The agent stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Mr. Mitchell, you signed agreements, you took oaths. Breaking those oaths is a federal crime, regardless of your age or your service record." Harold laughed bitterly. "Oaths to cover up war crimes, that's not an oath worth keeping." Around them, the platform had grown quieter as travelers sensed the tension. Some people had stopped to watch, pulling out their phones. Harold noticed this and felt a spark of hope. In the old days, these things happened in shadows. But now, with everyone carrying cameras, darkness was harder to maintain. "Give us the briefcase, and we can work something out," Morrison said. "There might be compensation available for veterans who experienced adverse effects during their service." "Blood money," Harold spat. "You think I'm doing this for money? I'm 92 years old. What am I going to do with money?" The second agent, who had remained silent, finally spoke up. "Your grandson Michael is quite bright. Just got accepted to West Point, didn't he?" The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Harold's grip on the briefcase tightened, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away. He was 22 again, standing in a jungle clearing, being told that asking questions about missing friends was bad for morale and worse for his health. "You leave my family out of this," Harold growled, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had once led troops into battle. "That's entirely up to you, sir," Morrison replied. "Cooperation ensures everyone stays safe." Harold looked around the platform. The circle of agents had tightened, but the crowd of onlookers was growing larger. Several people were openly filming now, and Harold could see platform security guards approaching, looking confused about whether to intervene. This was his moment. Harold had spent 50 years in silence, but he wasn't going down quietly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out in a voice that had once carried across military parade grounds. "My name is Harold Mitchell. I'm a Vietnam veteran, and these men are trying to silence me because I have evidence of illegal experiments conducted on American soldiers." The crowd murmured with interest and concern. Morrison moved to grab Harold's arm, but the old veteran stepped away. "In 1971, I was injected with experimental chemicals along with dozens of other soldiers. We were told they were vaccines, but they were actually testing biological weapons on us. Most of my unit died from cancers and other diseases that doctors said couldn't possibly be connected to our service." Morrison spoke into a small radio device calling for backup, but Harold kept talking, his voice growing stronger. "The men in suits don't want you to know that your government used its own soldiers as test subjects. They don't want you to know that when we started asking questions, they threatened us into silence. They're still threatening us today." One of the onlookers, a middle-aged woman, stepped forward. "This is outrageous. He's an elderly veteran. Leave him alone." Others in the crowd began voicing their support. The situation was escalating beyond the agent's control, and Harold could see the frustration in Morrison's face. "Sir, you need to stop talking and come with us now," Morrison said firmly. "This is your last warning." Harold raised the briefcase above his head. "This contains photographs, medical records, and documents proving everything I've said. If something happens to me, if I disappear or have an accident, the evidence has already been sent to multiple news organizations." It was a bluff, but a calculated one. He had sent emails, but he wasn't sure if they had gone through or if the recipients would take them seriously. The platform security guards had finally reached them. "What's going on here?" asked the senior guard, a heavy-set man named Peters according to his name tag. Morrison flashed his credentials again. "Federal agents conducting official business. We need you to clear this area." But Peters looked skeptical. "Federal agents harassing an elderly veteran? That doesn't look like official business to me." Harold seized the moment. "Officer, these men are trying to intimidate me into silence about war crimes committed against American soldiers. I'm trying to expose the truth, and they want to stop me." The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people, and the mood was shifting decidedly against the agents. People were shouting questions and demanding answers. The situation had become exactly what Morrison had hoped to avoid, a public incident that would draw attention to their operation. Morrison spoke into his radio again, this time more urgently. Harold couldn't hear the response, but he could see the agent's face tighten with concern. "Harold Mitchell," Morrison said, his voice now carrying a harder edge. "You have 60 seconds to hand over that briefcase voluntarily. If you don't, we will take it by force, and the consequences will be entirely your responsibility." The old veteran looked around at the faces surrounding him. Young and old, different races and backgrounds, but all united in their support for what seemed like a clear case of government bullying. For the first time in 50 years, Harold felt like he wasn't fighting this battle alone. "Officer Peters," Harold said to the security guard, "I'm formally requesting protection. These men are threatening me with violence if I don't surrender evidence of federal crimes." Peters looked uncertain, caught between federal agents and a public relations nightmare. The decision was taken out of his hands when the sound of approaching sirens filled the station. Morrison's backup was arriving, and Harold realized his window of opportunity was closing fast. The old veteran made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of waiting passively for whatever came next, he broke through the circle of agents and ran toward the main terminal, clutching the briefcase to his chest like a football. Behind him, he heard shouting and the sound of pursuit. The crowd cheered as the 92-year-old veteran, moving faster than anyone thought possible, disappeared into the maze of the busy train station. Harold's legs burned as he ran through the crowded terminal, his 92-year-old body pushed beyond its limits by pure adrenaline and determination. The briefcase bounced against his side with each step, and he could hear the heavy footfalls of his pursuers echoing behind him. Commuters dove out of his way, some shouting in surprise, others pulling out phones to capture the surreal sight of an elderly man being chased by federal agents. He ducked into a coffee shop, weaving between tables and chairs while the young barista stared in shock. The back exit led to a service corridor that Harold hoped would give him a few precious minutes to think. His lungs felt ready to burst, and his heart hammered against his ribs like a war drum. Behind him, Agent Morrison's voice boomed over the terminal's public address system. "Attention passengers, we are conducting a federal law enforcement operation. Please remain calm and cooperate with all personnel." Harold leaned against a concrete wall in the service corridor, gasping for breath. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Harold, this is Sarah Chen, the journalist. I just saw videos of what's happening on social media. The whole internet is watching this unfold." "Sarah," Harold wheezed. "Is this really you? How do I know you're not one of them?" "Check my Twitter account. I've been posting about government cover-ups for 5 years. My last story exposed corruption in the VA system. Harold, what you're doing right now is incredibly brave, but you need help." Harold pulled up her social media profile on his phone. The photos matched the woman he had researched, and her posting history seemed legitimate. But trust had become a luxury he couldn't afford. "Where were you supposed to meet me?" Harold asked. "Platform 7 by the information booth. I was caught in traffic, but when I arrived, I saw federal agents everywhere. I stayed back and called the news stations. Channel 7 has a crew on the way." The sound of boots in the corridor interrupted their conversation. Harold peeked around a corner and saw 2 agents systematically checking every door and alcove. He was trapped. "Sarah, I sent emails with copies of the documents to several news outlets. If something happens to me—" "Nothing's going to happen to you," Sarah interrupted. "But I need you to do something. There's a maintenance elevator at the end of that corridor. Take it to the 3rd floor. My cameraman is waiting there with Channel 7's news team." Harold looked toward the elevator Sarah had mentioned. It seemed impossibly far away, and the agents were getting closer. But what choice did he have? He made his move, shuffling as quickly as his tired legs would carry him toward the elevator. Behind him, he heard shouts of discovery. Agent Morrison had spotted him. The elevator doors opened just as Harold reached them. Inside was a young man with a professional camera and an older woman with perfectly styled hair holding a microphone. "Mr. Mitchell," the woman asked, "I'm Linda Rodriguez from Channel 7 News. We're here to help you tell your story." Harold collapsed against the elevator wall, still clutching the briefcase. "How do I know this isn't another trap?" Linda showed him her press credentials and held up her phone. "Because we're broadcasting live right now, the whole city is watching." Through the elevator's closing doors, Harold could see Agent Morrison approaching fast. The federal agent reached the elevator just as it began to rise, his face twisted with frustration. "Mr. Mitchell," Linda said as the elevator climbed, "can you tell our viewers what's in that briefcase that has federal agents chasing you through a train station?" Harold looked directly into the camera, his weathered face showing every one of his 92 years. "Evidence of war crimes committed against American soldiers. Evidence that our own government used us as test subjects for biological weapons during the Vietnam War." The cameraman zoomed in as Harold opened the briefcase with shaking hands. Inside were dozens of photographs, official documents, and medical records. He pulled out a black and white photo showing young soldiers lined up for injections. "This is my unit in 1971. 24 young men who thought they were getting routine vaccinations. 18 of them are dead now from cancers and diseases that doctors say couldn't possibly be coincidence." Linda examined the photograph. "Mr. Mitchell, these are very serious allegations. Do you have proof that these injections were experimental?" Harold pulled out a typewritten document with official letterhead. "This is a memo from Colonel William Bradford, the officer in charge of the program. He refers to the soldiers as test subjects and discusses monitoring their adverse reactions to various chemical compounds." The elevator reached the 3rd floor and opened to reveal a hallway filled with news crews. Word had spread quickly, and multiple stations were now covering the story. Harold stepped out, still protected by the live broadcast, and found himself facing a dozen cameras and reporters. Agent Morrison's voice crackled over a security radio one of the reporters was monitoring. "We have a situation on the 3rd floor. Request immediate assistance to contain a security breach." "Mr. Mitchell," called out a reporter from Channel 12, Are you saying the federal government is trying to silence you to cover up these alleged experiments? Harold looked around at all the cameras, all the people watching. For 50 years, he had been alone with this secret. Now, suddenly, the whole world was listening. They threatened my grandson, Harold said, his voice growing stronger. Michael is 18 years old, just graduated high school. He wants to serve his country like I did. They told me if I didn't keep quiet, he might have accidents during training. The reporters exchanged glances. Threatening a family member of a whistleblower was exactly the kind of story that made careers and toppled politicians. Linda Rodriguez stepped closer. Mr. Mitchell, you mentioned you have more evidence. What else can you tell us? Harold reached into the briefcase again and pulled out a list of names. These are the officials who authorized the program. Some of them are dead, but 3 of them are still alive. One is currently serving as an advisor to the current administration. The hallway erupted in questions and camera flashes. Harold felt dizzy from the attention and the physical stress of the chase, but he forced himself to continue. Dr. Margaret Sinclair, currently Director of Veteran Affairs Policy. General Robert Hayes, now retired but serving on the Pentagon's advisory board. And Senator Frank Morrison. Morrison, asked a reporter, any relation to the agent who was chasing you? Harold's tired eyes widened as the connection hit him. Agent Morrison, the agent downstairs, I never thought. Before he could finish the thought, the stairwell door burst open and Agent Morrison himself appeared, flanked by 6 other federal agents. But now they faced a wall of cameras and reporters, all broadcasting live to millions of viewers. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, Morrison called out, his composure cracking slightly. You are interfering with a federal investigation. This man is in possession of classified materials that pose a threat to national security. Linda Rodriguez stepped forward, her microphone extended. Agent Morrison, is it true that your father, Senator Frank Morrison, was involved in the program Mr. Mitchell is describing? The agent's face went pale. No comment. We need all civilians to clear this area immediately. But Harold was no longer the scared, isolated old man who had been standing on the platform an hour ago. He was surrounded by witnesses, protected by the bright lights of television cameras, and finally able to tell the truth he had carried for 5 decades. Agent Morrison, Harold called out, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had nothing left to lose. Your father ordered the deaths of my friends. He experimented on American soldiers like they were lab rats, and now you're here trying to cover up his crimes. The silence that followed was deafening. Every camera in the hallway focused on Agent Morrison's face as he struggled to maintain his composure. The weight of generations of secrets was crashing down around him, broadcast live to a nation that was just beginning to understand the true cost of keeping quiet. The tension in the hallway was thick enough to cut with a knife. Agent Morrison stood frozen, his father's name hanging in the air like an accusation that had waited 50 years to be spoken. The cameras captured every twitch of his face, every bead of sweat that formed on his brow despite the air conditioning. Harold could see the internal battle playing out in the younger Morrison's eyes. Here was a man who had built his career on following orders, suddenly confronted with evidence that those orders might have been covering up his own father's war crimes. Agent Morrison, Linda Rodriguez pressed, sensing the moment. Do you have any comment about your father's alleged involvement in these experiments? Before Morrison could respond, the building's fire alarm began blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the hallway as the piercing sound drowned out all conversation. The reporters looked around in confusion, but Harold's military instincts told him this was no coincidence. It's a diversion, he shouted over the alarm. They're clearing the building to get to me. Sure enough, uniformed security guards appeared at both ends of the hallway, ordering everyone to evacuate immediately. The live broadcasts were interrupted as cameramen were forced to shut down their equipment and move toward the exits. In the chaos, Harold felt a strong hand grip his arm. He looked up to see Agent Morrison pulling him aside, away from the crowd of evacuating reporters. This way, Morrison said urgently, if you want to live long enough to tell your story. Harold hesitated. Why should I trust you? Because, Morrison said, his voice barely audible over the alarm, I just found out my entire career has been built on covering up my father's crimes, and because there are people coming who make me look like a Sunday school teacher. Through the stairwell windows, Harold could see black SUVs pulling up outside the building. Not just one or two, but an entire convoy. Men in tactical gear were pouring out, moving with military precision toward the building's entrances. Morrison led Harold toward a service elevator hidden behind a maintenance door. "This goes directly to the parking garage. My car is on level B2. "Why are you helping me?" Harold asked as they waited for the elevator. Morrison was quiet for a moment. "I joined the agency to serve my country. I thought I was protecting national security, but if what you're saying is true—" He looked at the briefcase Harold still clutched. "My father was a war hero. At least that's what I always believed." The elevator doors opened, and they descended into the building's depths. Harold could hear the distant sound of helicopters overhead. Whatever was happening up there, it was big. "Agent Morrison," Harold said quietly, "your father wasn't evil. He was a young officer following orders from men who saw soldiers as expendable. The real criminals were the ones who designed the program." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Dr. Margaret Sinclair, General Hayes, they're still alive, still in power. And they're the ones who sent those men in the SUVs," Harold realized. "They can't let this story get out." The elevator reached the parking garage, and Morrison peered cautiously through the doors before stepping out. The garage was dimly lit and filled with shadows that could hide a dozen enemies. They made their way quickly to Morrison's car, a standard government sedan. As Morrison started the engine, Harold heard the sound of boots on concrete echoing from the stairwell. "They found us," Harold whispered. Morrison floored the accelerator, and they raced through the parking garage toward the exit. Behind them, tactical teams were spreading out through the garage, shouting orders and coordinating their search. As they emerged into daylight, Harold was shocked by what he saw. The entire block around the train station had been cordoned off. Black SUVs and armored vehicles surrounded the building. News helicopters circled overhead like mechanical vultures, but they were being warned away by military aircraft. "This is insane," Harold breathed. "All this to silence one old man." Morrison navigated through the maze of emergency vehicles, showing his credentials to get past the perimeter. "It's not about silencing you anymore. Too many people saw what happened. Now it's about damage control." As they drove away from the chaos, Harold's phone rang. It was Sarah Chen again. "Harold, are you safe? The whole building has been locked down. They're saying it's a terrorist threat." "I'm safe for now," Harold said, looking at Morrison driving beside him. "But they're spinning this as terrorism." The official story is that a domestic terrorist with classified materials was attempting to compromise national security. But the videos from the train station are all over social media. People aren't buying it. Harold felt a mixture of hope and despair. The truth was getting out, but it was being twisted beyond recognition. Morrison pulled into an abandoned warehouse district and stopped the car. He turned to face Harold, his expression grave. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you to know something. Those men in the black SUVs aren't federal agents. They're private contractors, military personnel on loan to intelligence agencies. They operate outside normal legal constraints." "You mean they're assassins?" Harold said bluntly. Morrison nodded reluctantly. "The kind of people who make problems disappear permanently. The fact that they're involved means this goes all the way to the top." Harold looked at the briefcase in his lap. Such a small thing to cause such a massive response. "There's something I haven't told anyone yet, something that makes this even bigger than experiments on soldiers." Morrison waited. "The chemicals they tested on us weren't just biological weapons. They were testing mind control techniques. Ways to make soldiers more compliant, more willing to follow orders without question. Some of the men in my unit became completely different people." Morrison's face went white. "Are you saying they were developing brainwashing techniques?" "I'm saying they perfected them," Harold replied. "And I think they've been using them ever since, on soldiers, on government employees, maybe even on politicians." The implications hung in the air between them. If Harold was right, then the cover-up wasn't just about hiding past crimes. It was about protecting an ongoing program that could be controlling people at the highest levels of government. Morrison's radio crackled to life. "All units be advised. Subject Harold Mitchell is considered armed and extremely dangerous. Shoot-on-sight authorization has been granted." Harold and Morrison looked at each other in shock. In less than 2 hours, Harold had gone from being a concerned veteran to being labeled a terrorist with a kill order on his head. "They're not playing games anymore," Morrison said grimly. Harold thought about his grandson Michael, probably sitting in a high school classroom somewhere, completely unaware that his grandfather was being hunted like an animal. He thought about all the families who had lost loved ones to the experiments, never knowing the truth about how they died. "Agent Morrison," Harold said, his voice steady despite everything. "I need to ask you to do something that will probably end your career and might cost you your life." Morrison looked at him expectantly. "I need you to help me get this evidence to someone who can't be silenced. Someone with enough power and credibility to make sure the truth gets out, no matter what happens to me." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, weighing his career, his safety, and his conscience. Finally, he pulled out his phone. "I know someone," he said, "but getting to her is going to be the hardest thing either of us has ever done." As Morrison made the call, Harold watched through the car windows as more black SUVs appeared in the distance, systematically searching the area. The net was closing, but for the first time in 50 years, Harold felt like he had an ally in his fight for the truth. The old veteran clutched his briefcase tighter and prepared for what might be the final battle of his long life. Morrison finished his phone call and turned to Harold with a mixture of determination and fear in his eyes. "Senator Elizabeth Warner. She chairs the Senate Intelligence Committee and has been pushing for transparency in government operations. If anyone can protect this information and make sure it sees the light of day, it's her." "Can we trust her?" Harold asked, watching as distant helicopters continued their search pattern. "She's the one who exposed the Pentagon's illegal surveillance program last year. 3 generals lost their jobs because of her investigation. If she's working for them, then we're all lost anyway." Morrison started the car again and pulled out of the warehouse district. "She's at her Washington office, but we can't get there through normal channels. Every airport, train station, and highway checkpoint will be watching for us." Harold studied the younger man's profile as he drove. "Why are you doing this? Really, you could turn me in right now and probably get a promotion." Morrison was quiet for several minutes, navigating through back streets while checking his mirrors constantly. Finally, he spoke. "My father used to have nightmares. I remember being a kid and hearing him screaming in his sleep. He never talked about the war, never told war stories like other veterans. I always thought he was just modest about his service." He paused at a red light, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "But now I'm wondering if those nightmares were guilt. If he knew what he had done to boys who trusted him and had ate at him until the day he died." Harold felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for the man beside him. "Your father wasn't a monster, son. He was a cog in a machine designed by people much smarter and much more ruthless than him. The real evil was in the Pentagon offices where men in suits decided that American soldiers were expendable." Morrison's phone buzzed with a text message. He checked it quickly and his face brightened slightly. "Senator Warner is in her private office. She's willing to meet with us, but we have to get there in the next 2 hours. After that, she has a public hearing and won't be available until tomorrow." "And we might not be alive tomorrow," Harold observed grimly. They drove in silence for a while, taking a circuitous route toward Washington. Harold used the time to organize the documents in his briefcase, preparing for what might be his final chance to tell the complete story. As they approached the outskirts of the Capitol, Morrison's radio crackled with updates on the search. The official story was still that Harold was a domestic terrorist, but social media was telling a different tale. Videos from the train station had gone viral, and hashtags like Veteran Truth and Government Cover-Up were trending nationwide. "The public is starting to pay attention," Harold noted, scrolling through news articles on his phone. "That might be what saves us," Morrison replied. "It's hard to make someone disappear when millions of people are watching." They were only 20 minutes from Senator Warner's office when Morrison spotted the roadblock ahead. 3 black SUVs were parked across the highway, with armed men checking every vehicle. "There," Morrison pointed to an exit ramp just ahead. "We'll have to go around." But as they took the exit, Harold saw more vehicles moving to intercept them. The net was tightening with military precision. "They're hurting us," Harold realized. "This isn't random, they know where we're going." Morrison's face went pale as the implications sank in. "Senator Warner, what if they got to her? What if this whole thing is a trap?" Harold considered their options. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of places to hide. But they had something their pursuers didn't expect: 50 years of accumulated rage and the desperate courage of men with nothing left to lose. "Stop the car," Harold said quietly. Morrison looked at him in shock. "What?" "Stop the car, I'm tired of running." Morrison pulled over to the side of the road, and they both got out. Harold could see the black SUVs converging on their position from 3 directions. He estimated they had maybe 2 minutes before being surrounded. Harold pulled out his phone and began live streaming on social media. Within seconds, hundreds of people were watching. "My name is Harold Mitchell," he said into the camera. "I'm a 92-year-old Vietnam veteran, and I'm about to be killed by my own government for trying to expose the truth about illegal experiments conducted on American soldiers." Morrison stood beside him, his face visible in the frame. "I'm Agent David Morrison, Homeland Security. I can confirm that Mr. Mitchell is telling the truth. The evidence he carries is genuine, and the people trying to silence him are acting outside the law." The viewer count on the live stream was climbing rapidly. 500, 1,000, 2,000 people watching in real time as the black SUVs closed in. Harold opened his briefcase and held up the photographs and documents for the camera. "These are pictures of American soldiers being used as test subjects for biological weapons. These are medical records showing how they died. These are the names of the officials who authorized their murders." The first SUV arrived, and tactical teams poured out with weapons drawn. But they hesitated when they saw the phone camera broadcasting everything live to thousands of viewers. A familiar voice called out from behind the tactical team, "Stand down, lower your weapons." Harold looked up to see a woman in an expensive suit walking toward them, flanked by her own security detail. Senator Elizabeth Warner had come to them. "Senator," the tactical team leader called out, "this is a restricted operation. You need to leave the area immediately." Warner showed her congressional identification. "This is a public highway, and these men are under my protection as witnesses in a federal investigation." Harold couldn't believe what he was seeing. The live-stream viewer count had climbed to over 10,000 people, all watching as a United States senator faced down illegal government operators on a public road. "Mr. Mitchell," Senator Warner said, approaching with her hands visible, "I've seen the evidence you sent to my office. I believe you, and I want to help you tell your story to the world." The tactical team leader was speaking urgently into his radio, clearly receiving orders from someone with authority that even senators had to respect. "Ma'am," he called out to Warner, "I have direct orders from the highest levels of government. These men are in possession of classified materials that threaten national security." Warner turned to face the camera that Harold was still holding. "The only thing that threatens our national security is a government that experiments on its own soldiers and then kills anyone who tries to expose the truth." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been investigating this program for 6 months, ever since I received anonymous tips from former military personnel. Mr. Mitchell's evidence confirms everything we suspected and more." Harold felt tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. After 50 years of carrying this burden alone, he was finally surrounded by people who believed him and were willing to fight for the truth. The tactical team leader made a decision. He raised his weapon and pointed it at Harold. "Sir, drop the briefcase and the phone, or I will be forced to use lethal force." But Senator Warner stepped directly between Harold and the gunman. "You'll have to shoot a sitting United States senator on live television first." Morrison also moved to shield Harold, his own service weapon drawn but pointed down. "I'm a federal agent, and I'm placing these men under arrest for threatening witnesses in a federal investigation." The standoff stretched for long seconds that felt like hours. Harold could see the conflict in the tactical team leader's face. His orders were clear, but the situation had spiraled far beyond anyone's control. The live stream now had over 50,000 viewers, and news helicopters were appearing on the horizon. This was no longer a secret operation. It was playing out in front of the entire nation. Finally, the tactical team leader lowered his weapon. "Stand down," he ordered his team. "Repeat, stand down." Harold sagged with relief, but Senator Warner caught his arm to steady him. "Mr. Mitchell," she said firmly, I want you to know that your courage today has changed everything. Tomorrow, I'm calling for congressional hearings into this program. The truth is finally going to come out. Harold looked into the camera one last time. This is for Tommy Rodriguez and all the other boys who never made it home. This is for every family who deserved to know the truth about how their sons died, and this is to make sure it never happens again. As news crews arrived and the tactical teams withdrew, Harold finally allowed himself to hope that the 50-year nightmare was finally over. The old veteran had fought his last battle and won, not with weapons or violence, but with the most powerful force in a democracy, the truth itself. The briefcase that had started it all sat safely in Senator Warner's hands, its secrets finally ready to see the light of day.